Shana Tova, everyone. This past February, on my first mission to Israel since October 7th, just after visiting the site of the Nova Festival and Kibbutz Be'eri, our group sat together in a school classroom in Ofakim. Ofakim is a town of approximately 35,000 people, and it is situated 15 miles from Gaza. It was there that we met with Danor Chatmi Ben Shoshan, the Director of Resource Development at Youth Futures. Youth Futures is an impressive organization in Israel that supports at-risk youth and their families throughout the country. And TBS has been a supporter and partner with Youth Futures for a number of years now. Danor spoke candidly about life in Israel since October 7th and how her organization had pivoted in recent months to support displaced families as well as those who were living on kibbutzim and other communities near Gaza. She explained that soon after October 7th, her husband had been called into the reserves. He had only been able to come home to visit a few times over the past 4 months. She was left at home with her 4 young children, ages 6 to 13, while also knowing that the families of Youth Futures needed her more than ever. And then she told a personal story. One late afternoon, all of the juggling just became too overwhelming. She was cooking dinner while simultaneously trying to help her kids attend class on Zoom and answer what felt like a never-ending list of work phone calls and emails. She was just trying to cook a simple pasta dish, but she got distracted and the pasta overcooked. Who hasn't that happened to? Staring at the mushy pasta, she started to cry. Danor's 10-year-old son came running into the kitchen, saw her crying, assumed something much worse had happened, and he began to cry as well. Then he gave her a hug, looked up at her and said, "Ima, why are we crying?" "The pasta," she answered. "It's ruined." At that moment, 2 more of her children came running in, and they joined in the crying as well. Finally, Danor's 6-year-old daughter came into the kitchen. They all looked at her with tears streaming down their faces, and they said, "The pasta! There's no pasta!" To which the little girl walked over to the kitchen table, grabbed a noodle from the bowl, and she ate it. She then joined the family hug and said, "Ima, this is the best pasta ever." Everyone laughed, and they all ate the pasta for dinner. Sometimes our children are our greatest teachers. And even more, what Danor was trying to tell us with that story is that the tears were not actually about the pasta, but rather were the culmination of a very difficult few months and now a difficult year. A year of tears. On October 7th, the tears began, and to a certain degree, they haven't stopped. Some tears have been the reaction to immense suffering and loss. Other tears have been the culmination of stress, uncertainty, and fear. We have all cried countless tears for our brothers and sisters in Israel. We have cried tears for the loss of life on October 7th and the loss of life on both sides in the subsequent war. We have cried for the injured and for the displaced. We have cried with the families of the hostages. We have cried for the vulnerability, the isolation, and the targeting of Jews everywhere. And then, of course, for many of us, there have been personal loss and challenges as well. Moments that summon the personal tears. The loss of a loved one, the loss of a friend, the loss of a job, the loss of a dream. And let's not forget that tears are not only part of loss and grief. Tears can accompany joy, overwhelming feelings of gratitude, moments that simply take our breath away. When have you cried this year? Whether tears from your eyes or tears in your heart? For what have you wept? Now, I know that this may come as a surprise to many of you, but I'm a crier. I cry a lot, and I know that you're shocked to hear it. I cry watching movies, I cry at weddings, I cry at funerals, and sometimes I cry amidst everyday conversation. If you were at the TBS tribute event at the end of last October, you were privileged to see my waterworks on full display. It was the combination of being so humbled to be honored by this community, the surprise of my own children, Meir and Gavi, introducing me at the event, and personally feeling totally overwhelmed by the events of October 7th. I cry all the time, but I don't think I've ever cried like that in public before. Honestly, at first, I was embarrassed, but then I remembered one of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite teachers, Mr. Rogers, who said the following, quote, "People have said don't cry to other people for years. And all it has ever meant is I'm too uncomfortable when you show your feelings. Please don't cry. I'd rather them say, go ahead and cry. I'm here to be with you. Go ahead and cry. I'm here to be with you." In a world in which too often we tell our children not to cry, in which crying is somehow seen as a weakness, and in a year that has been so full of overwhelming emotions, I want to humbly echo Mr. Rogers' words for all of us today. Words I think we need to hear right now. Go ahead and cry. I'm here to be with you. We are here to be there for each other. Why do we cry? We know that crying is not something that has to be taught. A newborn comes into the world crying. There's something evolutionary and primal in us that understands tears as a way of communicating and bonding. And while some animals can tear up from an irritant in the eye, human beings are the only species that shed tears from emotions. That means that to cry is to literally be human. Tears are words the heart cannot express. Words regularly divide us, but it is tears that so often connect us. They speak a language that needs no explanation or translation. They water our paths of transformation, leading to moments of connection, comfort, and perhaps even joy. When we share our tears, we are mingling our lives together in an emotional and meaningful way, a way that leads us to empathy and understanding, to actually seeing the world, even for an instant, through another's eyes. While we can never walk in someone else's shoes, we can share their tears. When was a time this year that you shared tears with someone? How did it feel? Judaism teaches that we are not alone in our tears. God cries as well. The Talmud speaks of God weeping. It says that God cries tears of sadness when we are far away and tears of joy when we come close. And human beings created in the image of God are created with the same capacity to weep. Our tears are the means by which we break down barriers of heartlessness, by which we can feel empathy, through which we can connect with each other, both in times of sadness and in times of joy. And it's our tears that ultimately connect us with God. This reminds me of a story about a prince who was said to have everything: the finest clothing made by the finest tailors, the most resplendent jewels that sparkled in the lights, the tastiest delicacies from chefs in every cuisine. He had traveled to distant lands, seen carnivals and circuses and spectacles of every kind. He met grand dukes, sultans, tribal chiefs. This prince had it all. The prince's servants prided themselves on seeing to his every wish, until one day the prince made a request that no one knew how to fulfill. He asked to see God. First, they brought the most rugged mountain climbers to take him to the top of the tallest mountain. The view was breathtaking, but the prince didn't see God. Next, they brought the trustiest sailors to take him to the center of the largest ocean. He was awestruck by the vastness of the sea. There was nothing but horizons in all directions, but he still didn't see God. So they brought the greatest astronomers to accompany him in the darkest of night, and he wondered at the cosmos as they showed him the stars. But yet again, he didn't see God. So finally, they brought him to the most revered religious leaders, bishops, priests, imams, rabbis. Each took him to their most magnificent houses of worship. He was inspired, but he still didn't see God. Failing in their mission, the servants consulted with every wise scholar, seer, soothsayer, and prophet until an elderly woman presented herself with a simple suggestion. The prince didn't need to travel far. He could find God anywhere, starting in his own village. She took him to a small house near his palace. There inside the house was a girl. The girl had lost her parents in a terrible journey, and she was injured and also bereft. She told the prince her story, and she cried. The prince, hearing the girl's story, seeing her tears, he began to cry too. At that moment, the wise elderly woman pulled out a small mirror and held it so that the prince could see his own tears. She asked him, "What do you see?" And he replied, "I see myself crying." And she answered, "Now you have seen God." Crying, whether tears from our eyes or tears in our hearts, helps us to see God in the world and to see God within ourselves. Go ahead and cry. We are here to be with each other. We are a people who both value tears and are fluent in them. And each year on the High Holy Days, we are certainly reminded of this lesson. As much as today is a celebration of the new year, these 10 days are meant to be a turning point, characterized by tears. Tears of memory, tears of love, tears of repentance. The Torah and the Haftarah readings, which we read throughout both days of Rosh Hashanah, certainly contain references to tears. Yesterday we read about Hagar and her son Yishmael's banishment into the wilderness. They quickly run out of food and water, and believing that they are bound to die, Hagar places Yishmael at a distance, and the text tells us that she begins to weep. In yesterday's Haftarah, we read about Hannah. Despondent that she remained childless, Hannah calls out to God in prayer behind a stream of tears. This morning, we read about the near sacrifice of Isaac, Yitzchak. The rabbis imagine the heavenly angels crying at the sight, and their tears falling into Isaac's eyes as he lay on the altar. And we just read in the Haftarah the words of the prophet Jeremiah, who says, "Thus said God, a cry is heard in Ramah, wailing, bitter weeping, Rachel weeping for her children. She refuses to be comforted, for her children are gone." This biblical verse resonates with our matriarch Rachel's timeless grief as she weeps for her children, for the pain of exile, the fear of annihilation, refusing comfort until her precious ones are back in her arms. Rachel's tears find tragic resonance today for all Jews around the world since October 7th. As for the past year, another Rachel has gripped us with the grief of a bereft Jewish mother. Rachel Goldberg Poland and her husband Jonathan have demonstrated the epitome of both parental love and parental pain in truly biblical proportions for their beloved son, Hirsch. Hirsch was taken hostage on October 7th from a roadside shelter near the Nova Music Festival. For over 330 days, they spoke, they shouted, they cried, they prayed for his safe return on every platform in every corner of the world. But as we know, it was not to be. At the end of August, Hirsch's body, along with those of 5 other hostages, was recovered in a tunnel in Gaza. The biblical and the modern Rachel wept together, and the entire Jewish people cried with them. However, the verse from our Haftarah this morning does not end with weeping. Instead, Jeremiah says that amidst the weeping, God's voice promises that, quote, there is hope for the future. And it is that same kernel of hope that Rachel Goldberg-Polin has provided us with during the horrors of this past year, as she taught all of us to hold on to hope. This is perhaps best symbolized in a poem that she wrote last winter, entitled One Tiny Seed. Listen to this excerpt from the poem. There is a lullaby that says your mother will cry 1,000 tears before you grow to be a man. I have cried 1,000,000 tears since October 7th. We all have. A sea of tears, they all taste the same. Can we take them, gather them up, remove the salt, and pour them over our desert of despair, and plant one tiny seed, a seed wrapped in fear, trauma, pain, war, and hope, and see what grows. One tiny seed. Tears, one tiny seed, and hope. Through her words, through her unimaginable strength, and most of all through her tears, I think Rachel Goldberg-Polin may in fact be laying the groundwork for Israel's eventual well-being. And in doing so, she is teaching us an important lesson for the new year of 5785. It is a path that will be paved by our tears, but that will be guided by hope. After all, the Hasidic rabbi known as the Slonim Rebbe famously taught, the cry of the Jew is the cry of hope. Rabbi Lindemann spoke about hope yesterday in his Torah comments, and Rabbi Peltz in his sermon. I guess we're all thinking a lot about hope right now. It is a timeless value and a lesson also taught by Psalm 126, which, by the way, at one point was in consideration to be the national anthem of Israel. The psalm begins with the words, Shir Hamalot B'shuv Adonai, Et Shivat Zion Chayinu Kecholmim. When God restored the well-being of Zion, we were like dreamers. This song of ascents is sung on Shabbat and holidays at the beginning of Birkat Hamazon, the blessing after a meal. It may sound familiar. Shir Hamalot B'shuv Adonai, Et Shivat Zion Chayinu Kecholmim. It's a song of redemption and joy when Israel is restored after exile. But the end of the psalm tells us something extraordinary, that the well-being of Israel will be restored because of our tears. Hazorim bedima berina yiksoru. Those who sow in tears, the psalm says, will reap in joy. Now I have to say, it feels too soon to talk about joy. Not this year. Not after all we have endured since October 7th and the continued war in Israel now on multiple fronts. But it is never too soon to talk about hope. Hope is what makes up the very core of our DNA. Our tradition teaches that our tears water our hope for the future. Seeds of hope. Hope is much deeper than they all lived happily ever after. To hope is to conceive of things turning out different from how they might be. To believe in the possibility of a positive outcome, often in the absence of any evidence. Hope sometimes seems like an irrational emotion, a chutzpahdik impulse that others may say is ill-advised or even naive. There's not always a scientific or historical reason to believe that tomorrow could be better than today. But in fact, things sometimes do get worse before they get better. A reality that we can certainly understand after this past year. Having hope requires that we take the long view. To be clear, having hope does not mean denying our current reality, but rather defying it. Hope forces us to squarely face the facts of life and then to see something beyond them. Living with hope means both dwelling in the world that is and at the same time aspiring to the world as it might yet be. What are the hopes that live within you as we enter this new year of 5785? Rabbi Hugo Gryn was a well-known British rabbi in the Reform movement who was known for telling a powerful personal story about hope. It goes like this. Rabbi Gryn was born in a village that at the time was part of Czechoslovakia. As a young boy, his family was sent to Auschwitz. For a while, he and his father shared the same barrack together. One midwinter evening, they realized that it was the first night of Hanukkah. So, his father constructed a little menorah out of scrap metal. For a wick, he took some threads from his prison uniform. For oil, he used some butter that he somehow obtained from a guard. If he were caught lighting the menorah, he would have been severely punished, perhaps even murdered. Beyond the risk, young Hugo protested to his father at the waste of precious food. Would it not be better to share the butter on a crust of bread than to burn it? And then his father said something he would always remember. Hugo, both you and I know that a person can live a very long time without food, but a person cannot live a single day without hope. A person cannot live a single day without hope. Hope sustains. It allows us to live with meaning and purpose. Hope for a better tomorrow gives us the resolve to stand up today for ourselves, our tradition, our values, our people, our homeland. And hope can begin with a tiny seed. One last story. When in Israel this past year, first with South Jersey Jewish Federation mission and then with our own TBS mission, both times I visited Kibbutz Be'eri. Kibbutz Be'eri is located just under 2 miles from the Gaza border and is the largest kibbutz in the Gaza envelope. On October 7th, the community of Be'eri endured unimaginable heartbreak and loss. 96 civilians were murdered on the kibbutz, in addition to more than 30 members of the IDF and security forces. 35 residents of the kibbutz were taken hostage, and the IDF estimates that over 500 terrorists infiltrated the kibbutz over the course of the day. The worst nightmare imaginable. And yet, both times that we visited the kibbutz and walked through the destruction and the ashes, both of our guides, first Semach and then Rami, shared with us the same message of hope. They said, "We will return even stronger than before." And then they each told a similar story. While it will take years to rebuild the houses and infrastructure of the kibbutz, the first thing the members of the kibbutz made sure to do was return to harvest the fruit and vegetables that remained. And in the fields that were destroyed, they planted new seeds, seeds of hope. As we drove out of the kibbutz, I saw the field they had planted, juxtaposed with burnt homes, desecration, and bullet holes everywhere. There was a field, freshly plowed, seeded, and now with growing seedlings. I sat on the bus, and all I could do was cry. Those who sow in tears will one day reap in joy, seeds of hope. Our tears water our hope for the future. Now is the time for planting and for sowing. As Psalm 126 concludes, Haloch yelech uvacho, nose meshech hazara, bo yavo verina nose alumotav. We go out weeping, yet carrying our bags of seeds. We will, one day, return with joy. Indeed, our sacred text and tradition instruct us to go out weeping to the most desolate places, the field of the Nova Music Festival, the orchards of Kibbutz Be'eri, within and amongst our grief-stricken brothers and sisters in Israel, and to do it all with an audacious act of hope, carrying seeds. We must allow our weeping, our tears of empathy and humanity to water those tiny seeds of hope, so that someday we, like dreamers, might reap a different harvest. Friends, hope doesn't mean that everything is okay. Certainly everything is not okay today. But hope means believing that there will be a tomorrow, that if we plant tiny seeds today, they may begin to grow in the days ahead. It's been a difficult year, yet as always, we must hold on to hope, and we must find a way to be a source of hope for others and for ourselves. What gives you hope? I find hope in the love of family and friends. I find hope in the compassion and the incredible goodness of our TBS community. I find hope in the strength, courage, and perseverance of our brothers and sisters in Israel. I find hope in the newfound unity of our worldwide Jewish community. I find hope in all those who have boldly and bravely stood up against anti-Semitism. I find hope in those who continue to put their best foot forward every day and who strive to bring more godliness into the world. And finally, I find hope in our ability to cry together and to use those tears to plant seeds of hope. As you leave the sanctuary today, in the synagogue lobby, you'll find a basket with a small packet of seeds. I invite you to take a packet with you, a small gift from TBS as we enter the new year. We go out weeping, yet carrying our bag of seeds. After Rosh Hashanah, plant the seeds and water them with your hopes for the year 5785. May our tears water our hope for the future. May our mother Rachel and all of her children, all of us, be comforted. Plant one seed and see what grows. Shana Tova.